Welcome to the webinar organized by Strive on Emerging Geostrategic World Order, Implications for India. We have amongst us the best speakers that we could gather for the subject. Before I commence, some basic rules for the webinar. All mics, lest those of the speaker, will be kept off. Questions, if any, should be typed into the chat box with your name and the speaker you would wish to address. These will be asked by me on your behalf. At the outset, let me introduce the subject. The world has always been shaped by events and incidents. 2020 was dominated by few major events which will impact the near and immediate future. These include the COVID-19 pandemic, worsening US-China relationships, Chinese wolf warrior diplomacy and aggressiveness, a desire of European nations to reassert themselves, and US elections. For India, apart from the pandemic which hit the economy, it was Chinese intrusions into Ladakh which has changed its outlook towards national security and compelled the government to reassess its security perceptions and funding. COVID-19 impacted economies globally, pushing many into recession, increasing unemployment, and reduced demands for products. The pandemic enhanced nationalism as nations ensured that essential industries such as pharmaceuticals would first serve the domestic sector prior to being exploited for diplomatic gains. For India, it was pushed back its dreams of a 5 trillion economy, but simultaneously given a boost to Atmanirbhar Bharat. US-China relationship soared through the year. Despite the change in US administration, in my view, competition between the two giants would continue in 4 sectors. These are firstly, an acrimonious trade relationship. Secondly, competition over technology with a focus on 5G, semiconductors, and artificial intelligence. Thirdly, disentangling bilateral economic ties, particularly in strategic sectors. And finally, will be friction in areas of Chinese sovereignty, including its maritime territorial boundaries and its stance of non-interference in what Beijing considers to be its domestic affairs, including Tibet, Xinjiang, and Taiwan. The new US administration would simultaneously be seeking to work closely with Beijing on climate change, public health, and nuclear non-proliferation. The EU is seeking to define its place and role. Despite being advised by the new US administration on early consultation on common concerns about China's economic practices, the EU went ahead and signed a comprehensive agreement on investment with China. This would make it harder to forge transatlantic unity against China. In the near future, the EU is likely to sharpen its policy tools and regulation to build a post-COVID-19 Europe that is more open, strategic, and autonomous, both politically and economically. It will seek to renew its transatlantic relationship under a Biden presidency while not relying on global American leadership anymore. Chinese wolf warrior diplomacy and aggressiveness post the pandemic led to China losing its ability to influence regions. It is currently in trade or diplomatic wars with multiple regions of the globe. Geopolitical tensions, such as in South China Sea and the Indo-China border, have the potential to rupture into conflict if not managed effectively. The emerging Quad is one example of middle powers taking a multilateral approach to their Indo-Pacific policies. India is facing hostility on both fronts, northern and western. It's belief that diplomacy and a coupled economy, despite trade imbalances, would ensure a peaceful northern border was shattered by Chinese intrusions. Added is growing Chinese movement in the IOR. Even if the northern border issue is resolved currently, such a resolution would be just temporary and could reoccur anytime. Chinese assertiveness and aggressiveness are here to stay. Hybrid warfare is ongoing, and India would need to concentrate in developing capabilities to counter it. In this scenario, India would have to reassess its allocation for national security. This will impact its economy. It would also need to consider its strategic alliances and partners. How far should India be willing to go while maintaining its strategic autonomy and continue building relationships with opposite camps? These are topics which we hope to discuss in this seminar. We now move on to our first session, Contours of the Emerging World Order. Our speaker for this session is Dr. Arvind Gupta. He would crystal gaze with a view to arrive at the emerging geostrategic scenario, wherein technology, grouping, and entailed interdependence of stakeholders will play an important role. A few words on our eminent speaker. Dr. Gupta belongs to the 1979 batch of the Indian Foreign Service. He has an MSc from Delhi University, MPhil and PhD from the School of International Studies, JNU. Over the course of his career, he has served in various capacities at Indian diplomatic missions in Moscow, London, and Ankara. While serving in the External Affairs Ministry, he has handled Afghanistan, Kashmir, Soviet Union, Russia, and Central Asia. He joined the National Security Council Secretariat shortly after it was set up in 1998 and served there till 2007. He was also Director General of the Manohar Parrikar IDSA from 2008 to 12. He was Deputy NSA from 2014 to 17. He also conducted Track 2 level interactions with think tanks of other countries. Dr. Arvind Gupta has authored 4 books and co-edited several. His latest book, How India Manages Its National Security, was published in 2018. He is currently serving as the Director of Vivekanand International Foundation, a public policy think tank situated in Delhi. Over to you, Dr. Arvind Gupta.
Namaskar, and thank you very much for inviting me to this seminar. And I really am privileged to share panel with eminent personalities like General Bikram Singh, Dr. Rajiv Kumar. And I also want to congratulate Strive. This is a new think tank, and we welcome the emergence of strategic think tanks outside Delhi. I think that is something that is extremely important. And from what I have just heard, and the website that was a glimpse of the website that you gave, clearly it's a serious think tank with a serious mission. And I'm sure what the deliberations will be very important and will not only inform the public, but also provide inputs to the policymakers. On behalf of the VIF, I want to congratulate you and also assure that we'll be happy to collaborate with Strive in your future programs. Thank you very much. A very fine introduction has been given to the emerging contours, the geopolitical contours, and how the world is shaping up. So I really don't have very much new to add to what you have said. But certainly what India should be doing is something that we would be discussing. But let me, I think I have about, 15 minutes, if I can be just
Yes, sir.
clear about 15
minutes. 8 to 20 minutes, sir.
20 minutes, okay. So let me just identify 4 or 5 key issues which I think need to be deliberated upon when we talk about what should India be doing and what are India's options. And these issues pertain to the shape of the world that we are seeing emerging right in front of eye, a new world which is more uncertain, as it was pointed out. The certainty is really missing, and ambiguity is the order of the day. I think it will be very important for India to have some assessment of what the world is going to look like. And COVID-19 has certainly provided that inflection point And I think some contours are certainly visible, and some of these were mentioned in the introduction also. But at the moment, I think there are more questions than answers. But nevertheless, I think it's useful to raise these questions. So one is that we are seeing the return of the great power competition. Whether it takes the shape of a new Cold War remains to be seen. In my view, I think we are heading towards a new Cold War, but in a multipolar setting. So it's going to be a very different competition than we saw when the US and USSR were competing with each other. And it in this competition, clearly US and China are going to be the two most important countries. And this Cold War will be underpinned by interdependence. So it's a very funny kind of a situation. The power equations are being rewritten, and the world is becoming multipolar, and the US-China relations will impact the emerging world order. Trump started the US-China Cold War in all seriousness, but how will Biden approach China? This, I think, is still a question mark. From our point of view, we have to see whether he will reduce the pressure on China. I think the Americans do understand that China is a major challenge for them, but they still don't seem to have a clear strategy as to how to deal with it. The Biden administration will have to be vigilant, and it will have to find the right strategy. But if recent trends are indications, it won't be easy for the US to find that strategy. Biden is banking upon the alliance of democracies, and he wants all the alliances which were damaged during Trump's time. He wants to repair them and reassure the alliance partners that US is serious and committed to them. But I think the US image, even among the allies, has been deeply dented, and the recent events are not very reassuring. These recent events have been described as insurrection by Biden himself, and they tantamounted to an attempt at to stage a coup. This has, I think, exposed deep divisions within America, and the message has gone to both allies and the adversaries that not everything is well with America. And Trump may have to spend a lot of time in healing America, which is one of the objectives that he set out for himself. But the society is so deeply divided and polarized that that Biden may spend next 4 years in just doing that. Whether he'll have enough time and energy to deal with some very serious international issues is also a question mark. Domestic issues are likely to consume most of his energies. Uh, Now, the comprehensive investment agreement was mentioned, which the European Union has signed with China. This was despite the reservation from the US, and Germany and France pushed the agreement because of their commercial interests in China. This also shows EU is divided because there are some countries like Italy, etc., who have had some concerns about this agreement. Now, the question is whether the EU will find a strategic role for itself in the world affairs alone. Because the transatlantic alliance is showing the sign of having been frayed. NATO seems to be in a disarray. There are sanctions, US sanctions on Turkey, which bought S-400 missiles from Russia. The EU the European countries are not very keen to make up with Russia, which has gone into almost like a strategic alliance with China. So, and its own Russia's influence in the rest of the world, particularly in the Middle East, has also increased. And neither the US nor the EU seem to have a clear strategy of how to deal with the Russia-China alliance. Uh, the EU, the Europeans regard China as a collaborator, a competitor, and a strategic rival. Now, this seems very nice as a sentence, but if you look closely into it, it will be very difficult. The policy that will emerge out of this description, collaborator, competitor, and strategic rival, is likely to be a confusing strategy, and it may not be sufficient to deal with China. Now, China is positioning itself to emerge as a number one power. About that, there is no doubt. It is challenging the US hegemony. It says that it rejects the hegemony for itself, but I think its deeds suggest just the opposite. In a multipolar world, it wants to remain number one, and certainly so in Asia, where it wants to remain a preeminent power. Now, China has ambitions to emerge as a global power and to mold the world in its image. It is rewriting history, and now it is even saying that it had a major role in defeating the Japanese in the Second World War and even in the founding of the UN. This is a revision of history which is now starting in China, and it is trying to export its economic model to other countries, particularly the developing world, through this Belt and Road initiative. It has made deep inroads into Europe, Eurasia, South Africa, South Asia, and Africa, etc. It has signed the RCEP, which is now the largest trading bloc in the world, and it has also indicated that it would be willing to consider joining Japan-led CTPP, from which the US had kept aloof. Now, this will give China a huge advantage. Despite the reservations about the Belt and Road Initiative, the fact remains that China has used it as a tool to enhance its influence and presence all across the world. And now the BRI includes concepts like the digital Silk Road, health Silk Road, etc. And China is using these concepts with great finesse in India's neighborhood itself. If these trends continue, US is in danger of being isolated. And as US has withdrawn from several international agreements, the void being created by the US in multilateral system is being filled by China. Now, according to some calculations, China is set to overtake the US as the largest economy, maybe in another about 10 years or so. And this is a really a sobering thought. It is also systematically building its military power. It has become an important player in the Indian Ocean, and it is also focusing on West Pacific. It is also trying to keep the US away from the first and second island chains. It is now a major space power, and it has spent a lot of money on resources and on modernizing its armed forces. It is a nuclear power, and it has, though its military capabilities may be less than that of the US, but these are not insignificant anymore. And Russia is it's China's ally, and that makes a lot of difference. That brings me to the second major trend, that is the of stressed multilateralism. I think all the major institutions which were set up after 1945 are under great stress, be it the World Bank or the IMF or the WTO, etc. These institutions are unable to handle the problems which have been created by COVID-19, like the vast destruction of jobs and livelihood across the world. During the COVID-19, the multilateral cooperation was mostly missing. And the COVID-19 has also brought home the other issues, which are non-military and non-economic issues, the social issues, which are very important. Things like the capabilities in health sector, etc., and non-traditional security issues have become very important. Now, in all this, I think multilateral institutions seem to have lost their way. And this is also linked with the a very obvious lack of a global architecture today in the world. As the world faces multiple crises, there is no credible global security architecture which can help resolve these issues and promote peace and stability. So you have many regional institutions and regional architectures, but they deal with very specific problems, and very often they also compete with each other. So that's also a big problem. And that brings me to the next trend, which is the race for technological dominance. And I think this was mentioned in the introduction also. This is technology is now a key driver shaping the world. Those who have technology will have the power. It is technology is a double-edged sword. Artificial intelligence has great potential to transform the world, but it also has very many negative underside as well. And I think the way it will restructure the labor market, the way it will restructure the production systems and the kind of impact it's going to have in social stability, that is one question. Also, the military technologies are going to be totally transformed by the artificial intelligence. We could discuss some of these issues in our Q&A session. So the point is that the race for technology is hitting on, and China has systematically built up its technological capabilities in space, quantum computing, telecommunication, deep sea bed mining, etc. And these capabilities are now quite substantial. The decoupling that was expected has not happened, as Western companies are continuing to invest in China, and the EU-China investment agreement is a pointer in that direction. India must have mastery over the strategic technologies based on artificial intelligence, big data analytics, virtual reality, blockchains, etc. Some steps have been taken. We have to put our house in together. I think Niti Aayog has done a lot of work in this area, and we'll hear from Dr. Rajiv Kumar on this one. But I think the time is of essence here, and there are many other issues which need to be sorted out before we really become as a powerhouse in this area. I will also mention the challenge of non-traditional security. COVID-19 has shown that non-traditional security issues cannot be taken lightly. In fact, they can be even more serious than the traditional issues because it's very difficult to deal with them as they cut across borders and they impact very many large number of people. So pandemics, food shortages, natural disasters, terrorism, cyber crimes, human trafficking, narcotics, order at the sea, etc., are some of the issues which country have to deal with. It's not easy to deal with these issues alone. The major efforts towards efficacious and effective cooperation are needed. Sadly, despite many conventions and agreements, the scale of problems is increasing. Climate change is one example, and non-traditional security issues sap the energy of individual states, give a fillip to non-state actors, and lead to social instability. Not enough attention has been paid to these aspects of security. Even in India, we have to bring non-traditional security issues into our security calculus. This is, I think, the need of the hour. And that brings me to another trend, which is the fate of globalization itself and the structure of the global economy itself. The COVID-19 represents the failure of hyper-globalization. The globalization has been disrupted. Globalization has led to, no doubt, unprecedented levels of wealth generation, but the distribution of wealth has been highly skewed, and the top 1% of the elite contributes nearly half of the global assets. Yesterday, I was listening to a program, and stock markets constitute about 5 times the global GDP. And this is the kind of a disconnect that is there now between the stock markets and whereas the global economy has gone down, the stock markets have boomed during this year. So what does it mean for social stability, etc.? I think this is a whole new area. We have to start thinking about it. And together with this is the environment. Environment has been deeply impacted. Consumption has increased in unsustainable ways, and that is the reason for climate change. Global systems have been disturbed, and global commons are all polluted. Now, all these areas also impact the geopolitics of the world. Now, as far as India is concerned, there are opportunities and challenges. I think we have been thinking about this for a very long time. And this government has taken a number of very important steps. I think it's remarkable that the way we have handled the COVID crisis, contained it, and now the way we are emerging as a pharmacy of the world and perhaps as a generous contributor to the health security in the world, that is something really appreciable. But this has to be multiplied many times in many areas. And that is where I think our opportunities lie. A series of reforms that have been unleashed, these will have a long-term impact. But I think the problems are still there. National security was mentioned. Uh, we certainly need to spend far more on national security that we have been doing. Greater synergies in national security need to be created among the institutions, between the center and the states, between the government and the public, and of course the alliances and partnerships that were mentioned. That also we have to be mindful of. Today's security challenges are far more complex than those even 10 years ago. India will have to be vigilant about China-Pakistan nexus, which has become deeper and now has economic, military, technological, and diplomatic dimensions. The China policy and economic order is a deep threat for India. India cannot remain oblivious to China as a expansionist nation. And I think that requires a rethinking on our China policy. I think we need to clearly define China as a challenger, and the kind of a policies that we have followed where we hoped that we'll be able to engage China and improve our economic engagement while the security issues will be on the back burner. I think those days are gone. The what we have seen at the LAC is not just the LAC. China has designs to connect it with the Gilgit-Baltistan, and and also of course squeezes from the Indian Ocean side as well. So China is a very big challenge, and we need a complete rethink on China policy. Other important area I think that we have to do is like new technologies are shaping the military doctrines and war fighting, etc. Hybrid warfare was mentioned. New technologies are very important. And we are already seeing that we are in war. The way the Pakistanis use cyber and information and propaganda, and also the Chinese, is really remarkable. I think we have to step up our own efforts. And all the jointness that we've been talking about in cyber, etc., this must be brought in very quickly. Otherwise, we'll be losing ground. And more resources are needed for the armed forces. At the same time, we have to ensure that these resources are spent gainfully. For greater attention, far greater attention needs to be given to jointness, technological warfare, information warfare, military and diplomatic strategy. And I think this artificial divide that we have in this country in our at least thinking that economy is one thing and national security is another, this must go away. And both national security and economy are they are the two sides of the same coin. One can't function about the other. So that synergy has to be brought in. So in conclusion, I think a new Cold War with new characteristics is emerging. We need to understand the complexities of the emerging geopolitical, economic, social, and technological landscape that is emerging. And I think think tanks can play a big role in this one. Despite the current difficulties due to the pandemic, India has a chance now to use the crisis to its benefit. Some steps have been taken, but not doing is also no excuse. So we have to really step up our efforts because the others are really going far ahead. The asymmetry that we have with China, this must somehow be decreased. A degree of consensus within the country on how to move forward is required. Democracy has been our strength and would remain so. However, the quality of electoral politics needs to be improved. It has become too polarizing for the good of the country. India must build its hard power based on technology. While high economic growth is essential, it should be inclusive and sustainable. It is up to India to ensure that the current crisis is converted into an opportunity. Equally, we should be aware of the danger that the opportunities coming our way will not be, if not used, will not, the opportunities have to be grabbed. If we don't do it fast enough, we will lose the ground. So we have to be strategic in our approach and nimble in our decision making and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arvind Gupta.